Is it possible that this chapter of One Piece is better than the last chapter of One Piece, 1154? Stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
This chapter is one hell. It is a phenomenal chapter of One Piece. It hits a lot of notes that I don't think cats have realized, or is setting up a major things. I will be doing theory videos and more topic videos on just this chapter and this chapter alone. I got like 4 or 5 of them planned out because Oda is going really, really deep. In this chapter, we have, for the overall review, the lion's share is character. If the character components are the lion's share of the components for the chapter, that's a good case we made here that we're gonna have a lot of things to talk about for the future because so many of these characters are major players in ways that you do not expect, honestly. So on that note, I'm gonna dive head first into this chapter of One Piece, break it down by its main components as per usual, the pace and chapter structure, the character components, which again are the largest part of the chapter, and then finally the story progression components for this chapter. It really is outstanding. So the rating's gonna be high. How high is the question? But if you want to see real quick my chapter reaction to the chapter, then you can check it out, a video I did on this channel a few days ago, or the entire stream on my Cole Requiem YouTube channel. And if you don't know, now you know, we do a lot of reactions to animes and shows on my Patreon, and we also have gaming content available. They're uploading now regularly on my Cole GG YouTube channel. So I'm everywhere. I'm doing a lot of content, and if you want to see more of the King's content, then absolutely check all these things out. Links in the box below. And if you do enjoy your boy's content at large and this video later on, then give it a thumbs up without a damn doubt. So first, let's get into the pace and chapter structure for this chapter. For this chapter, we have 3 parts, less than last week, which is better, I would argue. Normally, the less parts of a chapter are, particularly in a One Piece chapter, the better the chapter is. And 3 is extremely good for the pace and chapter structure. Loki meeting Rocks for the first time, and then we jump 8 years prior to the Reverie portion, which is from the current point in time in the story, 56 years ago in the past. And then we go back to the 48-year mark when Loki first meets Rocks, and now we have the arrival of King Harald, who is meeting with Rocks and company at OS or West Castle. So that's really it. It's actually organized a lot better, I thought, than the last chapter. Again, you have that one initial part of Loki meeting Rocks, kind of confused with the humans and how they kind of scurry about because they're so small. Then we have a nice cut to the Reverie where we follow for the most part just Rocks, and then a few things afterwards involving Rocks, and then we cut back to the more standard flow of the flashback. So it's very well organized for sure, I think, for the last chapter. No real hiccups there. 2 thumbs up for the pace and chapter structure for this week's chapter of One Piece. Next, we have the character components for the chapter, and this one is the thickest. It is the meatiest part of the chapter. First, start off with Loki. Loki did take an attack from Rocks at a very young age, but he did heal relatively quickly from that attack. By the time Harald, who was hurrying back to see Loki after he was injured, by the time he saw Loki, Loki was nearly healed. So this is a sign of Loki's physique, where we have seen Loki not only climb up the giant tree, and we have seen him fall down the giant tree and still survive. He quote unquote can't die, but also we see how his body is able to recover relatively quickly from an attack from Rocks Xebec, who did put Haki on that attack. So in the same vein where Luffy was attacking Colin with Haki earlier in the arc, Rocks was putting the same energy on the Elbathian kids, but Loki's recovery rate is abnormally high, which could be a good sign for the future of the arc, because we do want to see Loki active real quickly in real time. Because we're seeing in this flashback he can recover relatively quickly, that could be a good sign to where he does regain a lot more of his strength than what Gert expected Loki's recovery time window to be. And then number 2 for Loki's character is the way he sees a lot of hope in Rox's ambitions, Rox's way of life. We found out in chapter 1145 that the same way Luffy views Shanks is the same way Loki views Rox, which is why we saw 10 chapters earlier him asking Rox to be on his crew, and Rox just denied it. So that is when it comes to character for Loki, and now we have Harald for character. The fact that Harald does pause one of his voyages to return to come back to Elbaf to see Loki at least in part, of course, is I think a great sign of his care for his family. Even though he's too busy with his voyages, building his alliances and friendships with other people and nations, even though he's too busy to be around his family, he does deeply care. We did see him come in there to protect Hyruden and Ida from a giant that was going crazy during the hard times last chapter, and now in this chapter, we see how he comes in there for Loki to make sure he's okay. He does care about his family. He's way more on the Kuma side than on the Yasopp side. That's for damn sure. Harald's power. Harald has Conqueror's Haki infusion and was able to clash with rocks at the Holy Land without touching. The clash blew away anyone in a 5 kilometer or a 3 mile radius. So then the entire diameter would be 10 kilometers or 6.2 miles in terms of the entire diameter of the shockwave, and then being the epicenter of that shockwave. This clash is in a very, very, very similar vein as Roger and Whitebeard during their clash in the Odin flashback, and Luffy and Kaido in chapter 10-11. Distinct clashes of Conqueror's Haki infusion, where there is a large gap between the two individuals, and then massive shockwaves spam from those clashes. So in terms of power, Harald is nothing to scoff at all. But then we're not done yet, because Harald also displays, indirectly, but he displays what I think is a good showcase of his immense physicality. We already knew that he had immense power because in chapter 1153, he flicks snot so powerful, his big boogers so quickly that it's almost like a cannonball. And he kills a shark in the process and it goes flying in the air. A big, massive shark. But in this chapter, we see Harald leap, free fall, no parachute, nothing. He jumps on the New World side of the Red Line to make his way back to Elbaf. And that was such a crazy play that it even shocked Rox D. Xebec himself. Like, what? Are you serious? You just jumped. A lot of giants have been noted to their immense physical strength, and Harald is only adding to that, where he has that much strength and that much confidence in his body to handle a fall from the Red Line. This, I think, harkens back to Loki as a child being able to survive those falls from the Sun Realm to the Underworld. And then we even see at the beginning of this flashback in 1152, Loki bounds from God knows where, right next to the main pathway that leads to the castle at the very beginning of this flashback. So giants like Loki and Harald that have strong ancient giant blood can really handle fall damage well. And folks said that giants are weak. Please. After that, Rox D. Xebec. Now, man, Rox is the lion's share, and Rox is heavy. Whether it's the things that are shown or implied, he's phenomenal. There's no other way to say it. Rox D. Xebec is phenomenal. So, first things first, Rox's fighting style with his sword is very famous for using shockwave-like attacks, like a blast that hit like a big cannonball or a giant hammer. This means that his style of swordsmanship is more focused on blunt force rather than cutting. Hence why Loki didn't get his leg cut or cut off when Rox does what he does at the beginning of the chapter. And a note here is that when he does this move, he has a very similar stance to Roger's stance in chapter 966 when he clashes with Whitebeard. The way the Haki, though, is put on the blade is not the same, where we do see like a distinct gigantic bolt of Haki on Roger's sword, but with Rox, it's more like these smaller lesser bolts that are kind of circling his body and the sword. Does it really matter? Probably not, but it is something that I do want to note. Another note to his power is that after fighting an admiral, which was done off screen like father like son, it runs in the blood, he doesn't seem to be grievously wounded in any way. Matter of fact, depending on the frame, it looks like Rox may have taken no damage at all. It is very hard to tell if Rox was genuinely damaged or not in his altercation with the Admiral. But the end result is that the Admiral did die from his wounds later on because of Rox. If we parallel the admirals of today to the admirals back then, which is obviously a fair thing to do, of course, if we find out that the admirals of yesterday are inferior to the admirals of today, that's one thing. Then we'll adjust our take on this in the future. But until then, saying they're all relatively equal in the same camp is not a far-fetched thing to say. All 3 billion berry guys. Fujitora should not be that far from Green Bull, really. And the same thing goes for Kizaru. Only really Akainu and Kuzan would you give extra leeway to. But That being said, to take out a fighter like Green Bull or Fujitora even, with suffering very little wounds, if any at all,
God, this brother.
that is one hell of a feat. It's not looking good for certain agendas. I'll put it like that. Okay. The details we'll have to wait and see in the future if Oda does elaborate more on those details about the Admiral's power and or how this Admiral died exactly. Now, another note for his power, confirmed like Herald, he does have Conqueror's Haki infusion. The attack at the beginning of the chapter, hard to tell if he has any infusion there, but it's very, very clear and distinct and powerful when he clashes with Herald. And the shockwave is massive enough to where you can see knights and celestial dragons that are surrounding rocks and Herald in the area, but then once they clash, they're just blown away, they're gone. And again, they're blown away for that radius of 3 miles, 5 kilometers. Now, another note to Rocks for his power, though this one is a lot less clear, but we are going to chunk up in the power category until we get further notice about what exactly happened here. But this is potentially even bigger than the Conqueror's Haki clash, though probably not as big as killing an admiral. Either way, Rox D. Xebec destroyed the Gate of Justice while attacking a marine ship that was carrying tributes to the Holy Land. We do not know the exact details on how exactly he destroyed the gate or how much damage it suffered, but it is primed. It is absolutely primed to be a phenomenal feat, just considering the scale, the size of all that metal, the Gates of Justice. It is primed to be a gnarly attack power and destructive capacity feat. After that, for Rox, outside of his power, now we have his mental. Rox is a massive schemer, always plotting something. Also reminds you of a certain someone not going vo ha ha ha, but ze ha ha ha. He was able to sneak into the Chamber of Flowers in, I'm assuming, Pangea Castle to meet Emu. And in the process, he abducted 5 kings from different countries to create pandemonium throughout the entire Holy Land. He knew that the kings were not enough to extort Emu, but what's way, way, way more important is that seemingly he knew about the existence of Emu before he even entered the Holy Land, where there is a line to where he does note to how this is Emu's Holy Land. And I quote, "But your Holy Land is in a panic." How would Rox know that this entity, this figure, is the leader, the ruler of the Holy Land? That in itself is a big mystery to Rox as a character right now. So that is a crazy revelation about Rox. Really like emphasizing what Sengoku said about Rox in the Ultimate Chapter, where he said that Rox knew the secrets of the world. Rox knew Emu. Another key thing for his scheming is the plan for Pirate Island. Rox and his crew explain that Pirate Island, for the most part, is a barren wasteland where countries send their most hardened criminals to effectively die, basically Australia. However, they were able to build a settlement on Pirate Island, and they were able to do that because of funds that were found, gold that was found somewhere under the island, which got the WG and the Marines absolutely tilted. Rox, upon seeing that, decides to cut a deal
Dormammu, I come to bargain
with the world government that he would raid Pirate Island, take the treasure, and I believe split it between the two forces, his force and the world government, and effectively crippling Pirate Island, and it will return to a wasteland once again. But like the art of the deal, it was a fugazi. It was a lie. Lies. It's a lie constructed by Rox D. Xebec, where instead of raiding and killing all the pirates there and taking their treasure, in fact, he's going to go there to rule over Pirate Island and make it into a pirate paradise and his main base of operations, in a very similar way to how Kaido had the new Onigashima project, which may have stemmed from Rox's own play on Pirate Island. Rox had every intent of using Pirate Island to be a pirate paradise that he would rule over with an iron fist. And from that main base, he would wipe out the Navy, he would cripple the Holy Land, and he would effectively rule over the entire world. Pirate Island would essentially be the capital of the world in Rox's vision. And the scale of his operations were massive. And this is something I do want to say, but coincides to the next point real quick. The next point is that Rox is someone who does worship Davy Jones, okay? He is a Davy Jones enthusiast to the maximum, to the point where we do see how he's able to construct the core unit of the Rock's pirate crew. He does so via Davy back fights. But it's by then we also find out that when he's arriving to Elbaf, they fly no flag. That's an important detail because it does coincide with, let's say, the Marines and the world government kind of trusting him / using him, obviously, because they want to use him to their benefit if they can. At this point in time, when they cut the deal with Rox and so on, Rox is not a pirate. He has a massive bounty on his head, but Rox is not a pirate and wouldn't be viewed as such until later on in the flashback, and then this chapter 4 years after, or 44 years from current in the story. So let's say be like the world government cutting a deal, let's say some sort of powerful bounty hunter group to try and take on a large pirate force, which saves the world government planning, manpower, time, and so on. Just pay these guys to do the job, and in the process you could get rid of some unsavory bounty hunters. So in some sense it could be a 2-for-1 special on their part. But again, Rox was someone that saw that and said, no, we're gonna completely dupe them because I will be a pirate heading the largest pirate force the world's ever seen. That is absolutely insane. So you can see how threatening Rox was just based on his plans and schemes alone, let alone his phenomenal power. Now, next character we have is Emu. So even though Emu was confronted by Rox, they remained calm and unwavering, still playing with the butterflies that were in Emu's arm's reach. The official notes about Rox that he did not do anything more than this, as he knew he could not. That could be a testament to a few things. One of those things could be Emu's power. Rox knew that Emu was too powerful for him, potentially, and decided not to make a move on Emu. Or he could be lacking something and the time wasn't ready. In the same vein as, let's say, Roger, he found the One Piece, but the time wasn't right. They weren't the right ones to get the One Piece. It could be similar here. And those are two options among a lot of options. Like another example could be he didn't want to stay too long in the Holy Land because obviously he's in enemy territory. Not a good idea to stay longer than you need to. After Emu, we have maybe Gunko. The aide to Emu in the Holy Land might be Gunko or someone related to Gunko, because the eyes are the exact same as Gunko's eyes. If it is her, it explains why Brooke might know her, considering Brooke's age, and Gunko looks relatively the same age as she does now, but that would be 56 years ago in the past. So Gunko would be much older than she actually appears. But then on top of that, Gunko could be the aide to Emu this entire time we see in the story. So for example, in chapter 1122, when Emu feels Joy Boy's haki resonating from the elders when they come back to the Holy Land, and Emu screams, "Ah! Joy Boy," we have a person yelling, "Oh, great Emu," and then they run over to Emu to check on them. That could have been Gunko. And it would also explain, let's say, the reason why Emu could take over Gunko's body. Because as an aid to Emu, there's some sort of requirement, seal, pact, whatever, sign a dotted line by your finger, blood, stamp it, something of that sort that you have to do in order to be Emu's aid. And then the process, Emu can control your body directly. So Emu controlling Gunko in real time and not Summers or Killingham could be because specifically Gunko is or was an aid to Emu. Now after Gunko, we have the Golden Lion Shiki. The Golden Lion Shiki was a mobster / Yakuza as an initial Rox pirate crew member. And when you look at the movie and how a lot of folks, they call him Oyabun, you look at his whole pad and you have a lot of themes that relate back to Japanese themes, it does make sense why he would be a member of the Yakuza or a Japanese themed gang before he was a member of the Rox Pirates. After Shiki, we have Miss Bucking, aka Original Stussy. Her title as an initial Rox crew member was Science Robber. A very odd one, but it could relate to her going through the first successful cloning procedure to create the Stussy that we are familiar with. Maybe she was drawn to Vegapunk because of his genius, his science. He had all sorts of fancy gadgets. She tried to steal some of those gadgets, and in order to cut a deal,
I've come to bargain.
she underwent cloning experimentations. Now after Miss Bucking, we have the character introduction of Don Marlon. Now Don Marlon is a gangster mafioso from the West Blue, modeled off of Marlon Brandon, who was an actor that played Vito Corleone or the Godfather in the Godfather movies. And given his themes and where he's from in the world West Blue, he may have been involved with the 5 families of the West. the 5 families of the West mentioned by Jinbei in chapter 857, where these 5 mafia families run the underworld activities in the West Blue. And later on in the future, Capone would be one of the leaders of these 5 families of the West. After that, for character, we have Wang Zi. We finally get to see what Wang Zi looks like. Deceptive in many ways at first, that's all I'll say. If you watch my stream, you know what I mean. This triple chin Medusa hag, oh my good lord. Yo, that is my kind of woman. Wait, huh? Hey, listen, obviously what I said before was a joke. It was a meme. It was a play, okay? Obviously, I'll put it like that. That's the first thing. But the second thing is that despite the multiple different chins and the snake fork tongue, their appearance is very similar to wet-haired Caribou and his brother. So am I insinuating a lot by saying that? Correct, I am. But just keep that in mind because they do look very, very similar. And then finally, the last part for character is the character introduction of the pirate smuggler, Ganzui. Now, Ganzui is very likely the person that we see in chapter 1096 in that God Valley flashback part during the Kuma flashback, where we get to see a person with a long beard and that helmet, and that armor and that long beard and so on are the exact same thing that we saw one of the general zombies wear in episode 344 on Thriller Bark. That same general zombie, before they died, was a member of the Rocks pirate crew, one of the core members of the Rocks pirate crew, Ganzui, the pirate smuggler. And that is it when it comes to the character components for this chapter of One Piece. And now finally we have the story progression components for this chapter. And for this chapter, there is meaty chunks for sure, though not necessarily too big for the character. So obviously we got to see the first time Loki met Rox, and it's the first time of him being a single human ever. But Rox does influence him in a major way to where by the time we do have Harald come back to check on his kid, which Loki is shocked by for sure, but because of Rox's mentality, he's drawn to that. There's a 4-year window where Rox does kind of stay on Elbaf for a period of time, or at least he's going in between Elbaf and Pirate Island, trying to achieve his goal, always trying to repeatedly ask Harald to join his crew. So Harald is viewed by Rox Xebec as someone that's very favorable, which means that Harald in terms of power is very, very strong. If Rox wants Harald in the same way Luffy wants Loki, the line Rox says exactly bar for bar is this: let's go, Harald. If we team up, we're unstoppable. Obviously, it's hard to say how powerful at this point in time Shiki and Whitebeard and all these cats were. Probably a good bet to say that at this point in time in the story, Harald is even stronger than Whitebeard and Shiki just based on Rox's demeanor towards Harald. Now, keep in mind that these guys are very far from their primes. There's a long road ahead of them, both Shiki and Whitebeard, to get to their primes, which I would say are stronger than Harald. But Harald at this point in time in the story is likely stronger than Whitebeard and the Golden Lion Shiki. And that one Kankosaki clash between the two on the Holy Land just solidified, and of course him jumping, him bounding from the top of the red line to the New World side, those elements stuck very well in Rox's mind. And he absolutely, through thick and thin, he really wanted Harald to join the Rocks pirate crew. But Harald is committed to the betterment of Elbaf, which honestly was probably for the best because we know how things played out between Rox and his crewmates during their reign of terror across the New World. These guys were always at each other's throats. We know that Rox accumulated a lot of his guys through Davy back fights. In some sense, his crew is a hodgepodge of other crews kind of slapped together, like Wano Country, where it's a hodgepodge of different islands slapped together. You could have a situation where through Davy back fight, you could have members of rivaling crews on the Rocks Pirates who want to kill each other from their previous relationships. And Shiki himself states that we don't really give a damn about Rox. If Rox dies, we won't even bat an eye. And Harald would have been someone that would join Rox's crew in a more earnest way, but he likely would have never been on the same page as the other pirates who at the end of the day are just there to fend for themselves. When Rox talks to Emu, at the very end he has a line, "I will be back," right here. I have probably a video or two planned on just that statement and that statement alone. I do. Make no mistake, this video is coming out. We're on break. So these videos will be dropping in the very, very near future. The shorts as well. By the way, if you haven't noticed now, we have been returning to shorts on this channel. But when the narrator tells us that naturally word of this never saw the light of day and how this has never happened again in history, I feel like that's a statement that is being challenged. Like in the same vein as Impelled Down. Impelled Down was a place that no one could escape or break into. And here you have a situation where Luffy and company, and beforehand Shiki, they broke into and broke out of Impelled Down. In the future, someone will do something similar. I feel like that's going to be challenged. Absolutely. I'll save that again for another video. Now, again, we do go through the process of seeing Rox and Herald clash. We found how they escaped. We found out essentially he killed the Admiral off screen, and well, I guess the Admiral died later on from the wounds. But that being said, what's also pivotal too, quintessential for the future of the story, I think at least, is the reintroduction and the refocusing of the Davy back fight. First shown by, of course, Foxy and company, yes. And Robin explains to us during that point in time what a Davy back fight is. He specifically rocks. He wants Pirate Island to be his main base of operations, which I'm pretty sure he had been planning probably since the Reverie 8 years prior. But also, Pirate Island is the location of where supposedly the Davy back fights originated from. While Rox was gathering his crew, they say in the narration that in the pirating world, there had been a long existed and a famous merciless game played between crews. Is there a more personal reason as to why he wanted Pirate Island as a Davy Jones worshiper? You would say at a baseline that'd be it, where because he is a Davy Jones worshiper, he'd also want the homeland of the creation of the Davy back fights to be his main territory. However, there could be another plan at play here, where if Rox does know the secrets of the world and he's a Davy Jones worshiper, and mind you, Oda has drawn Davy Jones in SBS looking kind of goofy, but I don't want to dive too deep into that right now because, again, another theory video, another day. Absolutely. If there's an earnest to goodness correlation, a meaningful one, in terms of there's a plan of action involving Davy Jones itself, this could have deeper machinations than what you'd first think when it comes to Rox the Xebec and his intentions of taking over Pirate Island while also being a Davy Jones worshiper, the place that made the Davy back fights. At the bare minimum, in chapter 306, when they explain how the fights were created on Pirate Island, you can argue that, okay, well, maybe they weren't created per se, but that's more hearsay, and in reality, they were popularized by Rox and company who had their main base on Pirate Island. So it's more like the effect rather than the cause. Because they became popular on Pirate Island, folks could have assumed that it was created on Pirate Island. But again, this chapter, they kind of confirmed that they weren't. They were a long-standing tradition between pirates. So just keep all that in mind for the future. That all being said, we do have, again, Rox meeting Herald on Elbaf. He stayed there for about like 4 years on and off. And when he explains his plans to Herald is when Loki's really infatuated by the whole process. So that is it for the story progression components of the chapter. They're still pretty damn good. Particularly the notes about how he destroyed the gates of justice at some point, and he also was targeting the money that the Celestial Dragons were going, the tributes that they were going to receive from one of their ships. And he also took that Marine ship too. So for story progression, there are a lot of different things going on here. Parallels happening everywhere, but there is for sure substance here for the story progression components of the chapter. That all being said, for the rate for the chapter, I'm giving this one a 10 out of 10. I'm giving this One Piece chapter a 10 out of 10. I think this chapter is better than chapter 1154. Yes. I would say it's like in the same vein as 1044 and 1045, where 1044 is Luffy's Gear 5 introduction. And that chapter was a great chapter for sure, like phenomenal chapter. But I gave 1045, the showcase chapter, a 10 out of 10. I think in the same vein here too, when we find out more about Rox, see what Rox is doing on the Holy Land, him clashing with Herald, his plans for Pirate Island, destroying the gates of justice, and it's also very well paced. It's better paced than the previous chapter too. And even though in terms of story, you can argue not as much as the last chapter, because last chapter was Rox's introduction. We got to see what he actually looks like and so on and so forth. And he's the father of Blackbeard and so on. So in terms of progression, not as bold as the last chapter, but the character elements are way bolder. They're way more in this chapter, and they cross so many different lines. So I would say if last chapter was a 9 out of 10 or 9.5 out of 10, this chapter I think is a 10 out of 10. It is a perfect one of the few that I've ever given in my reviews of One Piece. But that's what I think. Let me know what you guys and gals think about the subject matter in the comment section down below. Once again, if you enjoy your boys' video content, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and click on that bell to join the notification squad. I'm gonna see you guys and gals on the flip side.
See you. Bye-bye.